Hey everyone, welcome to Eric Mintel Investigates the Interviews. Today, my guest is Martin Powell. Martin has written an incredible book right there, Kolchak the Night Stalker, The Mothman Requiem. But he's also written a plethora of other books and novellas and you name it. And he's even had a UFO sighting. So I can't wait to talk to Martin. This is going to be a great interview, so check it out. Ladies and gentlemen, as promised, here he is, author Martin Powell. How you doing, man?
Doing okay.
Where are you coming from for us today?
Florence, Alabama, which is in northwest Alabama. It's almost in Tennessee.
I love it. It's fascinating to me how you and I met, obviously on Facebook, but your love of all things Carl Kolchak, the Night Stalker, Universal Monsters, I mean, all of that stuff. And it just plays into, I guess, kind of like our growing up. I mean, we really kind of grew up in that same environment, and great memories and things like that. Were you always from Alabama, from that part?
No, no, actually, I was born in Louisville, Kentucky,
Okay.
and lived there till I was 19. And then I have lived all around. I've lived in Chicago. I've lived in the Twin Cities. I've lived in Florida, all these places. But my wife is from here. And when we met at a con, actually, a convention in Arkansas.
There you go.
And then a couple of years we became friends right away, and a couple of years later we started to rather seriously date, but we could only see each other at cons because we were 1,000 miles apart.
Right.
So when it came time to stop all that foolishness and settle down to it, um we it was kind of like, well, somebody's going to have to move, and it was no brainer for me. uh I this is similar um, to the area that where I grew up. Although where I grew up is not such a nice place now. I must say, it's a suburb of Louisville, and I won't say the name, but it was a great place to grow up.
Yeah.
But now it's not so good. But this is like that when I was a kid.
Um,
So it's a very nice place.
so
Uh, two
probably,
miles away, you're in the wilderness in a swamp,
oh, that's great.
and so it's great.
So as a writer, and probably it's probably a good area for you to kind of like go somewhere and just kind of get in the zone
Mhm.
and be creative. That's the thing I always like to ask my guests, before we start on this journey of like what you're doing and what's been going on, is what was that fire in the belly that like, what was that do you remember the catalyst for what made you want to do what you are doing now in life?
Yeah, pretty much. It was several things really. Um, when I was in second grade, I think I wrote my first book, which I illustrated in crayon. It was a sequel to Winnie and the Pooh, which we had read in school, and I didn't want to say goodbye, so I wrote another story for it. Uh,
Wow.
I wish I still had it, but because it was probably atrocious. But I was like six, so
But that's
so that's what kind of started it for me.
wow.
But my older brothers, I have two older brothers. They're actually quite a bit older than me, and they were big comic collectors. Not comic collectors in the sense of today. These were guys who bought comics, read them to pieces, and which is what I did as a kid. It wasn't any of this bag and board kind of nonsense. We got them because we loved them and read them.
Wow.
Um, so they did that, so I was familiar with that. Helped me learn to read really early. And um, the middle brother, who's a few years older than me still, he went on to be a teacher. But it's kind of ironic because he spent a lot of my childhood memories reading to me. Like he read The Legend of Sleepy Hollow to me when I was a kid, and I was just totally entranced by it. Wizard of Oz, stuff like that. So I learned to appreciate real books too. In fact, to me, there was something kind of hallowed about a real book. When I found out that Frankenstein, for example, was a book, it just suddenly raised in my appreciation of what Frankenstein was, even though I was much too young to really understand the book completely. But I remember reading it pretty early and kind of was like, I don't know, this is heavy going. And then a few years later, I read it again. It's my favorite novel. It's the one I've probably read the most I
Wow.
probably read it a dozen times and probably that many more.
And,
Um,
and it's amazing too, that story resonates with people too on so many different levels because
oh, it
yes,
does.
it's a creature that was created, but
Mhm,
it's a creature that's actually just it's starving for emotion and
mhm.
love and and
Yeah,
it doesn't know how to react in this environment.
right. And I think that's why the Boris Karloff movies, especially Bride of Frankenstein was the first Frankenstein movie I ever saw.
Mm,
So starting off on the peak, and I immediately identified with him because what 6-year-old doesn't identify with being awkward and trouble speaking sometimes,
mhm.
being very shy, and all this stuff, and you feel kind of clumsy and lumbering, and that's what he was like. And so
Yeah,
when I talked to Sarah Karloff's daughter about this, I mean, it brought tears to her eyes when I was telling her that we kind of understood each other. It seemed, me and your father's monster.
that's
She
wow.
she always said that he always told her that the monster was his best friend.
That's awesome.
So one summer, I think I was around 9 or 10. I was looking for something to read, and my brother was off at college, and so I um, started to explore his closet, uh, and found Something Wicked This Way Comes
Oh man,
by Ray Bradbury,
yeah,
and read that, and I was kind of like, okay, that was, I didn't give up comics, but I was kind of thinking this is a whole different experience. And years later, I would meet Ray. In fact, he was kind of a mentor of mine,
Oh
and
wow.
we would become good friends and kind of a second father in a way.
Oh my God.
And I didn't realize that then, though. I was like 9 or 10 years old.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was a great guy. So that's kind of what got me started. I also saw me and 5 different cousins saw a flying saucer when I've always been saying 9, but I think I was 10 now that I think about it more.
Okay.
Um, Nothing too dramatic about it other than the fact that it was a flying saucer.
Wow.
It was a Sunday afternoon. We were playing outside in the country and looked out over this field, which there was this kind of ominous line of woods,
Hmm.
and there it was. And
Like,
a girl cousin of mine saw it first and just
oh
said, "What's
my God.
that?"
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. And it was probably 50 yards away, so close.
Wow.
And it looked like it was about the size of a regular house. Um, Looked just like a Hollywood flying saucer. That's all I can say. Looked a lot like the Jupiter 2 on Lost in Space.
Really? Wow.
And we just kind of watched it for a while, and it would it would kind of glide back over the trees and disappear, and then it would come back.
Hmm.
And we watched it this a long time ago, so I may have the time length completely wrong, but it seemed like this was about a 20-minute ordeal, 15, 20 minutes.
Wow.
It might have been 5.
Hmm.
I don't know. The maddening thing about it was that all the grown-ups were in the house in the kitchen playing cards, and we could not for the life of us get them to even look out the window
Ah,
because they could have seen it clearly,
yeah.
and there it was. Um, and then after a while, it disappeared. I remember one of my cousins started to cry.
Hmm.
I didn't think it was scary, but I knew it was weird.
Hmm. It,
Um,
it it made that much of an impression.
yeah, I talked to another one that was there, with me at the time about it, and he said that he was describing to me without me prompting him. I just said, "What did you see exactly?" And so he described it, and he described portholes, but I don't remember portholes.
Wow.
So doesn't mean they weren't there. I just don't remember them.
Wow.
So whatever that was, I have no idea, other than it was a flying saucer.
That is
That's
amazing.
all I know.
Now, have you ever had any other experiences like that later on in life?
Um, well, yeah, actually,
Wow.
it's my life has been an odd series of coincidences
Hmm.
and synchronicities that happen fairly frequently in ways that you just cannot explain. My life has been an odd series of coincidences
Hmm.
and synchronicities that happen fairly frequently in ways that you just cannot explain. Like, for example, needing a reference for a story I'm working on, wondering which book is on my shelf that has that reference, and having it falling off by itself, opening to that page. This happened to me twice.
Wow.
Uh,
Wow.
Carl Jung said the same thing happened to him. So what that I don't know what that is, you know.
Well, I mean, I think it's intention. I think that was, we were talking about this with another guest earlier. We're talking about, what you put out to the universe, what you're putting out from a thought process standpoint, and being a creative individual. You are so in tune. I think we're all in tune with that energy field, and it's something that I don't know. There's a lot more research that needs to be done. I think with you having the UFO experience and some of the other people that we've talked to that have had these experiences, in our research, we're always thinking that could this be a generational thing, or could this be that some people are picked to experience these experiences? Because that's what it seems to be. Because you know how it is, like you just said, if they would have looked out the window, they would have seen that object.
Mhm.
But even still, you could have someone standing there and you're seeing this UFO, but they don't see it.
Right.
And
Yeah.
what's that? It's that thin veil there.
Yeah.
Uh, and that's always fascinating to me. So thank you for sharing that story. And now so this book fell off the shelves and it opened up to the page. And
Mhm.
what was it? What book are we allowed to talk about it yet, or you're not talking? Or
Oh, this was the last. It's happened twice. The first time it happened was very early in my career, when I was primarily writing Sherlock Holmes stories,
wow.
and because that's what the publishers wanted. You know, I have nothing against Sherlock Holmes. In fact, in a way, he's been my best friend in a way over the years. He really kind of got me started. First thing I wrote of any significance uh, was a Sherlock Holmes story, and that was immediately nominated for like a major award and so forth. So it was just like by almost by accident, it seemed like I stumbled into it after trying 5 years to get published, and failing
Yeah.
miserably. It was Hound of the Baskervilles, and it was a reference I needed. I don't remember now even exactly what it was about. It had something to do with their 221B flat, and it just dropped there, and there it was. The second one that happened was a little stranger. Um, it happened in San Francisco, and my wife and I were in this ginormous bookstore uh, that you could get lost in. It was like heaven to us. And and we were wandering about, and this book literally fell off the shelf, probably 7 feet above me,
Wow.
and hit me on the head, and then fell into our bath cart.
Oh my God.
And it was a book about the occult by Colin Wilson.
Wow.
And I opened it up, and I had some of his books at home. I was very familiar with who he is,
Mhm.
and I emailed him a few times after this, a couple of years before he died. And I looked it up, and picked up the book with my hands and I looked at it. It was an old kind of worn paperback, and I opened it up and looked, and it was autographed even.
Oh wow.
And I was like, wow, to somebody, I forget, Robert, I think, and whoever Robert was, I don't know, but so obviously I bought it and brought it home. So that was very strange, and I found a lot of interesting things in that book that have since gone on to be in other books, like for example, my Kolchak book too. So
Which, by the way, is on my shelf, and it found its way from my shelf to my desk. Here it is. This phenomenal, phenomenal. And
thank you.
I have my signed copies on another area, but this is amazing. I just put this as a post on the Kolchak Facebook page, and
Mhm.
so many people were commenting that they wanted this book. So check out that page because I think you're going to get a lot more sales. But this to me, for people that haven't seen this is Moonstone Publishing, correct?
Mhm.
And this is out. This is your latest work right now, correct?
The latest one published, yes.
Yeah. This was amazing to me because, being that I was like in 1975, I was like maybe 8 years old, and when this series was out. And thankfully during reruns, we were able to see this when I was in my
Mhm.
teens. And I
Right.
was like, oh my God, the show, it only lasted what, one season?
Yeah.
And for those that are not familiar, it's called The Night Stalker, Carl Kolchak. He was a reporter, and he would always go out and investigate all these supernatural things that were going on. the appearance suddenly of Jack the Ripper in Chicago. And then they actually the very first one I think was well, it was called The Night Stalker, and that was about a vampire, Janos
Right.
Scorsese. And that's my favorite episode because Barry Atwater played the vampire. I think he played probably one of the greatest vampires that's ever been out there.
He was genuinely scary.
He was. Oh my God.
Yeah.
How did you go about like finding the source material and all of this? This is we should say it's Kolchak the Night Stalker, the Mothman Requiem, obviously about the Mothman in Point Pleasant, West Virginia.
Well, the publisher, um, Joe Gentili, he emailed me one day and he said, "Hey, he had the license to Kolchak and had had it for a number of years." And he said, "Hey, man, would you like to write a Kolchak novella about the Mothman?" And
Sure.
and it just kind of came out of nowhere, you know. And I went, "Well, yes." I've been into the Mothman long before most anybody else heard of it. You know,
Hmm.
I mean, I've read the Mothman prophecies probably in the middle '80s
Yep.
or something.
With John Keel. Yep.
And so that's really was my main source of reference. But also, I've talked to a number of Mothman experiencers
Mm.
and alleged Mothman experiencers. I have to say that of the several that I talked to, all of them struck me as rather credible and upset about what they saw.
Yeah.
Nobody was bragging about it or seeking the spotlight. They were truly disturbed.
So wait a minute, you were actually being like Carl Kolchak. You're like actually interviewing these people and trying to get their take on everything. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's
Well,
awesome.
well, the fact that the book is written in first person, with Carl narrating himself, you
Yeah.
kind of had to put yourself in his mindset, and so I got to, it's been one of the most pleasant experiences I've ever had writing that book because I got to be somebody else every day when I sat down to work, and so it's
Wow.
almost like being an actor in a way. You could escape yourself
Sure. Oh
and
yeah,
and be Carl,
absolutely.
and he's such an everyman kind of character. Most of us can relate to him. There's a couple guest stars in it too that
I love that.
people who are interested in this kind of stuff, I think, will get a kick out of.
For people who are published or that people that are authors or want to be authors and writers, what kind of advice can you give them?
I've had my ups and downs. Like I said, I worked hard to get started, and then once I got started for a couple of years, it was kind of a whirlwind of a lot of stuff coming to me, and then I had that kind of dull middle tier, you know, um, time with my career where uh, I mean, I kept working. I've been a full-time writer since I was in my 20s. But I kept working, but it wasn't necessarily stuff that I wanted to do
Hmm.
necessarily. So although there's been only one book that I've ever written that I truly hated doing, I
Mm.
mean truly hated, and I
Mm.
never mentioned the name of it because I wanted to just go away.
Yeah.
But but I only mention it because even though I wasn't interested at first in a lot of the things that were coming to me, I found a way to make them interesting to me, which
Yeah.
is what you have to do if
Sure.
you're a working writer, not just one of these folks that have the luxury of writing when they feel like it or whatever. But when you have to produce every day, you have to figure out a way of making what you're working on yours,
Oh, totally.
even if it's something you don't own. Like I've written Batman and Superman too, and which of course I don't own, but you have to make it yours. There's got to be something, some little thing that maybe only you know about,
That
but that's what you got to do.
that you can latch onto and then
Yeah.
the reader can latch onto. I liked how you said that you thought of Ray as like a second father. And it's funny how you have those dynamics because that's, in the jazz world, that's how I felt with Dave Brubeck. Dave
Oh yeah.
Brubeck was a father figure to me, having found his music, when I was 14, and then having met Dave and then having had a friendship with Dave and then having Dave say to me, "You play my music better than I play it." So it's like he was just that kind of a guy, and it
Mhm.
was a phenomenal thing.
Mhm.
So, and isn't it true that we are so lucky that we had mentors growing up? And I think that's really sadly lacking today is the lack of really great mentors today. Yeah, you've got
Right.
sports guys and all this kind of stuff, but they're not mentors. You know, these mentors in a whole different way.
Hmm. Well, it's, I will always remember how, when I first met Ray, I was 19, and I didn't even tell him that I was wanting to be a writer, but
Mm,
he somehow knew.
mm.
And we would call each other on the phone. Well, he would mostly call me because I felt too shy to call him. But he would call me from Los Angeles, and say something like King Kong's on tonight. And I'm like, Ray, I don't have those stations here. This was long before,
That's
that kind of
great.
stuff.
That's great though, man, that you had that kind of dynamic
Yeah.
relationship there. That's phenomenal.
So one time, just out of the blue, he said, "Hey, why don't you send me one of your stories?" And I was like, "What?" Because I'd never talked to him about it.
Wow.
And I said, "Well, they're not very good." He said, "Well, send me the one that's the least no good." And so I did. And about a week later or so, we talked about it, and I was a nervous wreck. And he I'll never forget the first thing he said about it. He said, "Well, it starts well, but it's really not very good, is it?" And I was like, "Oh, I was just crushed," and just wanted to walk into traffic. And he said, "No, no, don't get discouraged." He said, "That's good." He said, "The important thing is you got it done."
Mm,
He said, "When you're starting out like this," he said, most important thing is to get it done."
hmm.
He said, it don't even worry about the quality of it at first. That'll come." And so his belief and mine too was that if you want to be a writer, you have to write, and you have to do it every moment you have the chance. Otherwise, you'll never get anything done. You'll never get anywhere.
Mm.
Really, I think a lot of folks today are under the impression that this is kind of an easy thing, especially when you can self-publish and so forth, and that's great. I think that's a wonderful thing. Boy, if I'd have had that, when I was starting out. But when you don't have to deal with publishers or editors, you're your own boss and you can do what you want. That's like heaven. But the writers today that do that, and this is nothing against them at all. I think it's great. But they're not having the same experience that somebody like I do, where you do have to please an editor, you do have to please a publisher, you have a certain deadline you have to stick to, and so on and so forth. But they shouldn't let that bother them, because if they're working just for themselves, well, you've got all that freedom, and they should take advantage of it, really.
Yep.
Um, so the best advice I could give anybody that wants to be a writer is, if you're writing, you're a writer, and you just need to keep doing it. And um, yeah, self-publish if you can. That's great. Traditionally, traditional publishing is tough these days. It's tough. It always has been, but it's
What are publishers looking for? What is that? What would that be in your opinion? Obviously,
um,
obviously good stories, but
yeah. It A lot of it seems kind of trendy to me, and especially in the last decade or so, that whatever's the hot thing, that's what whoever's looking for,
mm,
which has not been something that has interested me too much.
hmm.
Um, but whatever. I mean, it's a way to get started. If you could catch somebody's attention, one of the best things you can do, really, as a young writer starting out, is to go to some of these conventions and actually find an editor and try to get their attention,
Mm.
and just so they'll maybe remember you next time when you send them something.
Right, like you did with Ray, and
Yeah,
just get on their radar screen. That's amazing. And
yeah,
look, you said that you were shy and whatnot, but that takes a lot of courage to be able to do that and have that. I mean, so you had that something greater within yourself, that you knew that this you had to make this connection, because you knew that was like it was a something that was really burning inside of you. That's why I always like to say, what was that fire in the belly?
yeah. It was strange, because when I started going to college, um, that was my goal from the start before I met Ray. But what I was studying was paleontology, which is
Mm.
what I wanted to do. Um, and I also was acting in some theater work too at the same time. So I don't know how I slept. Um, but everything was going on at once. And of course, I picked out three great ways to make a living, professional writer, an actor, and a paleontologist, all of which, is kind of like back then would get you nowhere really very fast. Um, But paleontology isn't the same today as it used to be. Back when I was studying it and working in the field, there were only about, I don't know, a couple thousand people maybe in the world making a living from it that
Wow.
weren't teaching.
Right.
Okay. Um, Now that's not the case. Since it really, you got to give the credit to Jurassic Park,
Oh yeah.
because that's
Oh,
that's what that's what has interested everyone in all of this. And a museum that I worked for a while, when I was taking a much needed hiatus from writing after I'd worked for Disney for a while. So
wait,
um,
there's so many layers here. We got to talk about that too.
well, I wrote scripts for them for about 10 months.
Wow.
At one particular time, I worked on the Aladdin TV show, not the movie, but the
Oh
TV show,
wow.
the
Okay.
TV animation, and so forth, and did some stuff like with the Tarzan movie and things like that too, and the dinosaur movie.
Love
But
it.
it was just I'm glad I did it because I think I learned a lot.
Mhm.
But at that time, I understand it's different now. But at that time, Disney was so micromanaged
Mm.
that you at the end of the week you didn't even recognize what you had written. So many people had taken it apart and rearranged it and so on and so forth. And that's part of the business. That's something that you if you can deal with that and that's okay with you,
Yep.
that's fine. You join the Writers Guild and Hollywood and so forth. They take good care of you, I understand. But for me, it wasn't for me. And so I went to work for Science Museum of Minnesota after applying for a position as a gallery supervisor in the lab
Mm.
that I was underqualified for completely, but I got it.
You got.
And so
Uh,
so I did that for about 3 years.
wow.
And but the reason I started writing over that, really, it was like I was finished up with Disney, and I was thinking, what am I going to do now? Because I really didn't want to have another single creative thought,
Mm.
and I thought, oh, wait a minute, I have an education, and so I looked on what was then the internet, which is nothing like it is today, and
Yeah.
found those job openings. Um, but I was still when I was in college, though. What changed my mind between which path I was going was I started to sell stories.
Mm.
And so I was kind of like, oh, that worked. And then another one, that one worked. And so pretty soon that's what I was doing. And I had lots of little side jobs and things, of course, but pretty soon I was able to quit those and just write full time.
For I think for the listeners and the writers out there, you've given them a lot of really, really valuable advice. And please, folks, go check out Martin Powell, and please pick up this incredible book, Kolchak the Night Stalker, The Mothman Requiem, available on Moonstone Publishing. It is a great read, and it is a wild ride. So well, listen, Martin, thank you so much, man. Again, for the next episode will be coming, so stay tuned on that. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. We've got a lot more guests coming up, so thank you so much. Have a great night.